Well, each year we highlight a plant known as the Perennial Plant of the Year, and it's actually a plant that was voted on as an outstanding plant by the members of the Perennial Plant Growers Association in the United States. And it's usually a plant that they feel like will do quite well on a universal type basis. And of course, there's all kinds of promotional materials. I try to get the garden centers to carry them, and I want to show you the 1995 selection. This is actually, as a common name, called Russian sage. The genus species is Perovskia atriplycifolia. And it's a perennial, so that means once you stick it in the ground, it's going to come back year after year. Now remember, like most perennials, there's usually a peak time that it performs for you. If you look at this one, it's very unique from the standpoint that it has kind of a grayish color foliage. It has flower spikes that are kind of a purplish blue color, and you see the bees are enjoying it quite a bit. It's really quite aggressive though as far as the height goes. It doesn't really spread in your garden, but it has a tendency to get pretty tall and fall over, so it can get 4 feet, and that's why you need to consider using it as a plant in the back of your perennial beds or as a specimen or a mass bordering plant, again in the back, so it doesn't overgrow the other things. Now, it really will tolerate full sun, and we have it, as you'll notice, in partial shade, and that sometimes can cause it to stretch a little bit more and fall over for you, and it may not bloom quite as intensely as if it was in full sun. It's also known that if you put it in an area that's heavy soil that doesn't drain good, it will rot on you pretty quickly too. Now, the thing that I want you to keep in mind, though, is when you read about all this publicity that the Perennial Plant Growers Association has done on these plants, you need to keep in mind that most likely they truly haven't tested it in every part of the country. It's just people who have grown them and have given suggestions. For example, the information sheet that was sent out on this one says it starts blooming in late July through the end of the season until it gets a frost. Well, here we are early July, and this one actually started, I would say, in middle June. So there's going to be a little bit of variation, and you need to keep those points in mind anytime you're selecting perennial plants. Now, this one again is the 1995. Well, this program has been going on for 5 years. Actually, this is the 6th year. Let's go take a look at some of the other previous winners, and I'll bring you up to date on how they're performing in our perennial garden. Well, I guess I could ask the question here, would the real Astilbe Sprite please stand up? And the reason I'm saying that is because we actually supposedly have the same plant, but they look very different. And the 1994 Perennial Plant of the Year again was Astilbe cultivar Sprite. And if you'll notice here in the center, last year we actually got in some little rooted plants that weren't very big, probably divisions off of some, that we stuck in the ground. They put up a little bit of foliage, but they didn't bloom until this year, and they're just now starting to bloom. And the so-called Astilbe Sprite is a pink blossom. Well, this one's starting to bloom pink, but if you look at the foliage, it's almost very cut leaf or lacy-like, compared to the one that we purchased this year in a container that was probably 6 inches, potted them up or planted them in the ground, and they've already bloomed for us, and they were very brilliant color pink, and we've got some footage to show you that, which actually occurred several weeks ago. So I'm really not sure which one would be the appropriate Astilbe Sprite. That's something you'd want to check out more at your garden center through some of the literature. The thing to remember though is these need shade. If you put them in full sun or even afternoon hot sun, they're going to burn on you. If you get too much wind, they'll scorch on you. So they also need good moisture. They're really a shade-loving plant, and it's a great choice if they're in the right location. And once they've bloomed for you, just go back down to the center of the plant and kind of deadhead them a little bit, and then they'll grow for you. Keep them watered in the hot summer, and they'll bloom again for you next spring. Well, the 1993 winner was Veronica Sunny Border Blue. And again, it's one of those plants that they encourage you to put in full sun. Well, a lot of people have told us that they didn't do good in full sun, so we have ours in partial shade, and they're not doing good here either. And actually, it's probably my least favorite of all of the perennial plants that have been selected. Sure enough, the color of the flower, which starts again in June, is pretty intense. It's really a purplish blue color. but we've always had the leaves dropping and dying on the bottom of the plant, even last year when it wasn't as wet as it was this year. So again, this one is pretty tall and lanky. There's a little bit of good color to it. So maybe if you could put it behind other plants to hide the leaves at the bottom, it would work out pretty nicely. But in my opinion, there's plenty of other Veronicas and some of the Speedwells that perform a little bit better. But let's go take a look at 1992 now. Well, for a plant that offers a little bit of variation in texture and in color that also loves the full sun, then you might want to consider Coreopsis, which is Moonbeam cultivar. And this one again loves the full sun. It grows more in a mound, and you'll notice that the flowers are very delicate, a lighter pale yellow, especially compared to some of the other Coreopsis that are around this particular planting. Now we've noticed with this one though that in a good rich soil with a little bit of fertilizer, what happens is has a tendency to grow up a little bit taller and then fall apart in the center like this one has done. And of course some of that has to do with rain and the wind as well. But again, a very low growing perennial compared to some of the others and a nice choice. And let's keep looking at some of the earlier introductions. Well, the 1991 selection was actually chosen for its brilliant texture of foliage more so than its flowers. You'll notice that the leaves have an interesting shape, almost like a maple leaf shape with purple underneath. Some of them are crinkled a little bit more, but the flowers are really very inconspicuous, meaning they're not showy. They send up the stalks here, the spikes. Again, not a lot to it, and a lot of people like that elongation of them, and then they'll trim those out too. This is actually called Heuchera, and a cultivar name is Pallas purple. Sometimes a common name is rock geranium. It likes the shade again, good soil, keep it moist but well drained. And this is actually about 5 or 6 plants that are put together that are really too close together, but it gives the impact of one plant. So check your spacing depending on where you want to put them in your perennial garden. And again, just remember that this one needs a little bit more shade. Now I'd like to take you over to one that you probably don't know a lot about that actually started the whole process. Well, the first plant to be awarded the Perennial Plant of the Year title was actually Creeping Flux, or Flux stolonifera. Now, a lot of the people that are visiting today, some of our volunteers, have commented that it won't take me long to talk about this one. But actually, it's a little misleading because it's very low growing. The stolonifera tells you that it spreads by stolons underground, but it's not very aggressive. It's also a flux that blooms in the spring, and what it does, it sends up these stalks here with blue flowers on them, and again it's pretty loaded with them, but like most perennials it only offers one bang for the season, so to speak. But it doesn't have any disease problems or insect problems. It's really a nice choice. This particular cultivar is Blue Ridge, so there's a few variations in the stolonifera. Now you're probably looking at it and saying, well, that's the common creeping flux that we see each spring, and actually it's not. That one is properly called moss flux, which is Flux subulata, and it's the one that has entire mass of color, either pink, purple, or white, and you can even barely see the foliage. This one you would still see the foliage with the flowers. So again, a nice selection. And overall, I think most of the perennial plants of the year have been really good choices for Oklahoma. Again, if you put them in the right condition. This one is in partial shade. Now, the thing to remember about perennial plants is once you put them in, you need to give them a couple of 3 years for them to really reach their maturity. They'll continue to spread and get bigger and better year after year, especially in more color and impact. And most of these are very popular and really pretty easy to find at your local garden center. So why don't you check them out and probably think about planting these in the fall or again next spring.